Hi.
Hello,
What's your name and what are you doing?
I'm Max, and I work for Charles River Canoe and Kayak to combat the invasive species of water chestnut here on the river.
Great. What does it look like?
It's sort of an oregano-looking leaf that spreads out from the center.
I don't see a lot of them on the surface.
Well, if you look to your left there, you see a little patch of them.
Here's a
They can
patch.
grow into huge areas.
And it looks like they might be a lot under the water. Is that the case?
As the summer goes on, they continue to sprout and sprout and sprout, so we have to do multiple passes over one area.
Great. Hey, thanks for letting me know.
I was being watched very closely. Hi, this is Diana Young. I'm the moderator, the meeting moderator for tonight's meeting with Dan Melnichuk on the controls. And as you may have just seen, this is our first Waltham Land Trust webinar, and we practiced, but we're going to probably make some mistakes, like the fact that I can't seem to go back to the first screen, but to welcome you. But this gives you the agenda for this evening, although we're about to make a quick change in that. But there are a couple of things we wanted to say. First of all, I hope you'll be patient with us since we're just figuring all this out, like a lot of people are with Zoom and webinars. And we've got two concerns. During the course of our discussion today, there's going to be a couple places to ask questions, both when Alex Green finishes his talk, and then we've got a Q&A session at the end of the meeting. And what we'd like is, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function. For those of you who have a PC, it's at the bottom of the screen. If you're using a tablet, you'll have to look for it. It just says Q&A. We're saving the chat because we're going to use the chat at the end of the meeting to be able to vote on our nominees. So now what I'm going to do, and I'm also going to suggest that you use the speaker's view as you go forward. Now let me introduce NADENE STEIN, who is our president, for a few remarks.
Thank you, Diana.
Here, let me,
everyone. Welcome to our annual meeting, and we're really excited to be in this venue to share with you some of our wins from this year and to give you some history lessons, which are always good, and we're good for that here. So we are, like I said, we're excited to have you here. Usually I would welcome particular people, but I only can see board members here. On behalf of our board, we really are pleased that you've all been able to join us tonight. And we know that you're in for some really good information and some, hopefully some exciting news as we move through our agenda. Thank you.
If I could, if Martha Creedon and Sonia Wadman would unmute and show their video. I'm going to stop the share so we see you in full form. And if you could explain our new news.
Hi, folks. Sonia Wadman here, the Executive Director of the Waltham Land Trust. I am so excited to report that today at 1:45, my cell phone started ringing. I looked and it was Senator Michael Barrett calling. He is a fabulous ally of the Waltham Land Trust, of open space, of agriculture, of all things good. So when I saw that Senator Barrett was calling, I dropped everything and picked up the phone to hear the news that he had. And he wanted to let us know that the Senate had just taken a break from their long talks about the budget. And they were taking a break and they decided to vote at that time on the Waltham legislature, which includes and is about the Waltham Field Station. So the Senate has voted and approved.
Yay, I can hear you all clapping.
Yes, I know everyone's clapping.
I know everybody's clapping. I can hear the computers rumbling across the town.
Absolutely. Martha's going to kind of tell us what the next steps are so we can be ready and prepared.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. So the next step is that the bill goes to the governor for signing, which we fully expect that he will do. He has 10 days period in which to do so. Then after that, the purchase and sale will proceed between the city of Waltham and UMass. So getting to this point has been several years, as many years in the making, and it has involved many, many people and several organizations. Some of the less visible work was as recently as this summer, and it involved suggesting revisions to the language of the bill to ensure that the land will be limited to certain uses in perpetuity. These uses are agriculture, open space, and recreation. Next up, the nonprofit tenant organizations, which, as you know, include the Waltham Land Trust, is to get assurance from the city of Waltham regarding our tenancies following the transfer. Current tenant leases with UMass extend through December 31st of this year. It's time now to eliminate the decades-long insecurity felt by the tenant organizations and support a pathway for direct communication between the city and tenant representatives so that we can enjoy a stabilization period during and after the transition of ownership. Phew. So thank you to everyone, no matter what your involvement, for your support. And I look forward to the day when we can all go out to the field station again and celebrate together. Thank you.
Thanks.
Woo-hoo.
Okay. For some reason, my slides, oh, now we got it to move. Let me introduce Sonia Wadman, who is going to announce who this year's Inge Euler Environmentalist of the Year is. Go ahead, Sonia. Sonia, you've
Yep,
got to, oh, okay.
I'm coming, sorry. Okay, so on to the next exciting news. So I have to say that this is my 10th year being the executive director, or actually working for the Waltham Land Trust. And I am just so happy to have been a part of this group for so long. And I can't wait to be a part of it for much, much longer. One of the best aspects of my job is getting to work with volunteers, with public officials, with folks from other towns, from a whole bunch of different people. And a lot of these people do lots and lots of work to help our environment. And every year we pick someone who has gone above and beyond, the call of duty to step up and speak up and be present for our environment. We named the Environmentalist of the Year award after one of our founding directors, Inge Euler, who is just a wonderful woman. When she stepped down from the board a few years ago, we were crushed, but we knew we had to memorialize her in some way. So we decided that we were going to name this Environmentalist of the Year award after Inge Euler. So 2020 has been a very challenging year, and a lot of our activities have shrunk. We haven't done as much stuff. We don't have people going to City Hall as often as we normally would to stand up. We haven't been having as many big stewardship events like we normally do. A lot of things have changed. However, one person has still responded to my calls for help and everything. And this gentleman is just a wonderful person. In 2018, he joined the Waltham Land Trust. And I swear to you, he has been to practically every single event since then. I'm sure you've seen him. He's become a very active steward. And even though we couldn't have our big group activities, we still had we had some smaller stewardship activities that were taking place. And this guy was always there. I can always count on this gentleman to come to City Hall wearing his Waltham Land Trust colors and showing his pride when I say we need help, we need people to come and stand up for land preservation. He's always there. Also, he's very active on our email lists, not only those internal to the Land Trust, but he reaches out and participates in e-lists like Nextdoor, where he often responds to questions. He educates people about issues, and he answers questions and sometimes asks them, but he always recommends that people go to the Waltham Land Trust website or reach out to me to get more information. This gentleman is a huge booster for the Waltham Land Trust, and I can't think of enough for all he's done in the few short years that he's been with us. And I'm so happy that he'll be with us for many more, I hope. So for these reasons and many, many more, I know that a lot of people on this call will echo my congratulations to Robert Premack. Bob Premack is our Environmentalist of the Year. Bob is amazing. He's just the best. I'm sure you guys recognize him. Like I said, he comes to every single event. He's wearing his Waltham Land Trust t-shirt and his cap, and he's got a wonderful water cooler from the great folks at Hydro Flask that shows the Waltham Land Trust logo. And Bob is just an amazing person. Here he is working hard, removing Oriental bittersweet, and he's just going to town, wearing a mask, of course. Here he is with some folks doing work at Graverson, and Lois and Leslie. And then here he is again with Betty and Bob doing more stewardship, this time at Hardy Pond. Bob is just amazing. So Bob, I assume you're on this call. I know you said that you had 2 meetings happening at this time, but you said that you were going to come to this one, which obviously made me very happy. So Bob, I believe that you can be allowed to say a few words if you would like to. And I think that if you're on the call, then maybe our moderator or Dan can allow you to speak.
Dan, be the one if he can do it.
Robert. We'll give Bob a little bit of time, but
One
yeah,
second,
I mean,
I'm looking for Bob in the list of participants here.
oh my gosh, he has to be on the list.
Oh, he is. He's chatted to say thank you very much. And just for all the attendees listening, when you chat, you have to select panelists and attendees so that if you want to make sure everybody sees it versus just to the panelists. Robert, not Bob. Okay, here I'm. Bob, I'm about to click allow to talk. If you'd like to say something, here goes. Okay. You'd have to unmute yourself, Bob, if you're, oh, I guess. Let's see.
You just unmuted me, but this is Robert Logan.
Oh,
not
oh, sorry.
different Robert. But if you want to give me an award, I'll take it.
No, I unmuted both Roberts because it would jump to the top of the list here. Bob Primack, if you would want to talk, I'm going to mute you back up here. Sorry, Mr. Logan, Council Logan, where are you? There you are. Okay, so Bob, I guess you're not. You're not talking.
There's a bunch of congratulations that people are using the chat. I don't know if we can wipe that out before the vote, but
It says audio difficulties in the chat. So Bob does not seem to be able to talk at the moment. So there you go. I guess we need to move on then.
Okay. Dan, would you queue up that video?
Yes, I can.
One other thing, there's a few congratulations also in the Q&A.
Okay.
So
if Bob wants to look at them, that would be terrific. Anybody else can as well.
All right, we're gonna now gonna see a little video.
Oh, I've got to stop sharing. I'm sorry.
And just so you know, there is no audio.
It's my pleasure to tell you a little bit about Alex Green, our keynote speaker tonight. As I suspect most of you know Alex, but for those who might not, let me tell you a little bit about Alex. This is an abbreviated history because he's done so much and is involved in so many things. But for those of you who don't know, Alex went to college at Brandeis, and he became the owner of Back Pages Bookstore, which he ran for about 10 years. He was the chair of the Waltham Historical Commission. He's been a researcher at Harvard Law School currently. He writes for Cognoscenti, which was the writers program with WBUR and many other publications. He's a book printer, and he's been a teacher at the Gann Academy. And it was as a teacher that Alex and his students studied and learned about the Metfern Cemetery, the cemetery you just saw on that video. Now let's have Alex tell us about what he and his students discovered in all their work. Thank you. And let me stop my share and let Alex bring it up.
Hi. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak and share tonight. And on a night with such positive and momentous news about the UMass Field Station, I just want to take a moment to say congratulations. I know how much incredibly hard effort went into making that happen, and I know that there is work to come. But what a wonderful thing to be able to celebrate. And since I'm now going to share with you a somewhat depressing story about this cemetery in the woods, I'll say that I'm somewhat grateful that Bob's audio wasn't working so that he can come in at the end and we can all offer him some congratulations and hear some kind words about the amazing work that he's been doing for the Land Trust these last couple of years. But tonight, yeah, I would like to share with you a little bit about this cemetery that is in the woods in North Waltham and the Beaver Brook Reservation, and the history of how it came to be what it is and what I discovered with my students over the last few years. I'm going to share using a PowerPoint presentation, and hopefully I don't do a terrible job. I've been teaching 11th graders a bit through the pandemic, and they are ruthless with technology. So I've learned, I think, a bit, hopefully, to get us through this. And this is the first time really that I'll have summarized kind of the work that we've been able to do. So it's a real honor to be able to do that too. Some of the very first people I met here in Waltham, where I've spent my entire adult life, are members of the Land Trust or are folks who passed on but were prominent members of the Land Trust. I feel like all of you have been kind and gracious in sort of watching me grow up, and hopefully in part of sharing this work, I'm sharing sort of where that's all led to, and hopefully some good things. So I'm going to share a little bit about the cemetery to start with, and hopefully at the end of this, maybe just share a couple of moments of thoughts about where the work on this cemetery really touches the question of what preservation is, which is obviously something that connects all of our work here tonight. So with that, I want to start just by sharing a little bit about Waltham's institutions. Anyone who's driven down Trapello Road will see the work of the Land Trust in action. Enormous amount of open space preserved across a huge swath of land. Most of that land was institutional land. You could call Trapello Road Institution Row in some regards. At its height, there was the Middlesex County Hospital. There was the Murphy Army Hospital. There was the Gabler School, which was part of the Metropolitan State Hospital. There was the Met State Hospital. There was the Fernald School, and then further down into Belmont, McLean Hospital. The two institutions that I'm going to share a little bit about tonight are the Fernald School and the Metropolitan State Hospital, each with their own history. The Fernald School was founded in 1848. It was the very first public educational institution in America for people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. It's a radical notion at the time that perhaps people with disabilities could learn and would want to learn and would want to go through school and could come out on the other side happy people, having known more things. That school grew under the leadership of Walter Fernald, and it moved to Waltham in 1887 over a number of years and grew into the very large campus that it was until it closed in 2014, encompassing 296 acres of land. And across the road in the 1930s, the state opened the last of the state asylums for people with mental illness. That was the Metropolitan State Hospital. Where the Fernald School had points in its history that were altering for the entire course of education in America, the Metropolitan State Hospital was always, frankly, an overcrowded institution. It never had a good history. People were warehoused there, and those of you who will remember it probably remember things like sirens that would go off when people escaped from the institution during its years that it was open. So it was one of the very first state institutions closed. In 1991, I believe it was shut down, and the Fernald School shut down in 2014. The land of the Met State then became what you see today. And where they shared a history was that they shared this cemetery, which opened in 1947 and was used until 1979. It's split into two sections. There's a Catholic side and a Protestant side, and each person buried there is in a numbered grave. There were no names placed on them. It's believed to spare their families of the people buried here any shame. This cemetery grew to include 296 graves. It's about a 50-50 split between people who were at the Fernald School and people who were at the Metropolitan State Hospital. In 2017, I started teaching a disability history of the United States course at Gann Academy. And the goal was to do project-based, community-focused work around disability history and to use the lands around us from this institutional history, try to understand a little bit about who we are as Americans and what our history is. And at the end of that first year, a community member approached me and gave me what you see here, which are an assortment of pieces of information that tell the names of every single person buried in the cemetery. It was long believed that the names of those individuals could not be released because they were medical records. But thanks to the work of some disabled activists at the Danvers State Hospital north of here, in the last few years, it's become clear that these are considered vital records and that sharing the names is okay to do, and that we can use vital records to learn more about the people who were buried in the cemetery. As a result, I started talking with colleagues at Gann about what we might do. The community members who possess this information don't want to come forward and haven't wanted to. I think there's still a continued fear and reservation about what it means to hold on to these names, but we're grateful that they did, because if they were lost, we would never know who was buried here. I decided with my colleagues that what we would do is that we would give over our entire 2018-19 school year to investigating the history of the Metfern Cemetery with our students. We went into that work with this phrase that you see on the left-hand side. We bury the dead of non-Jews and Jews alike and comfort their mourners and visit their sick because of the ways of peace. Gann Academy is a Jewish high school, but a pluralistic Jewish high school, and one with deep values about what it means to do right in the world and to honor the dead. So what we did is we started our year by going out to the cemetery, and each student, as you see at the right, stood at a grave and was given an envelope with all that we knew about that person, which was their name and the stone that they were buried at. And we said to them, we're going to have to tell their stories, and we're going to have to figure out who they were. And we would start with these 48 graves for one of the students in the 3 classes that worked on this. But how do you do that? That's an enormous undertaking. And what I've learned over these years is there's no better undertaking to do something this enormous with than a group of 11th graders. They're awesome. They'll try anything. And we needed to do anything and everything to figure out who these people were. At the right, you'll see the students at the State Archives, the State Registry of Vital Records, researching death certificates and indexes to find birth certificates and marriage records on anyone and everyone buried in the cemetery. We poured through thousands of records on Ancestry.com, in person, any way that we could. We tried to track down the stories of individuals' lives that are recorded in what you've seen this year, which is the census record. These very basics that you fill out can stitch together a life about who did someone live with, where were they, when were they there, and when did they end up in the Fernald School or in the Metropolitan State Hospital. And this is what those records look like. There's a draft registration card at the top right. Yes, members, residents at the Fernald School actually served in World War I. A former student at the Fernald School served in the Civil War. Marriage records, census records, on the bottom left, an immigration record. All of these stitch together the story of a life. And then going beyond that, finding things that are difficult to find. At the top left, Wisterly Harris, who's buried in the cemetery, had a prison record. This is a photograph of him as a young man when he entered prison and an older man when he left. cilia quarantiello at the bottom left, a young girl born with profound developmental disabilities and one of the only few people buried in the cemetery with a gravestone. And at the top right, a hotel that Wisterly Harris worked at in Florida in the 1920s. He was born in the Jim Crow South before he moved north to live in Massachusetts. But what we found as we did our work is that more and more people than we ever knew wanted to know the stories of what had happened here, and many of them had a direct invested interest. We learned that the mother of the very last person buried on the Protestant side of the cemetery never knew where her daughter was buried. We held a memorial ceremony there at the top right, you can see with her. At the left, you can see the great-granddaughter of another person buried there. And at the bottom left, you can see the TV stations that came out to start to cover this work. You realize that 296 people adds up and goes out and out and out and out and out, and touches a lot of lives. And so what we decided was that we were going to tell the story of all 296 people buried in the cemetery, and dedicated the entirety of the rest of the year to researching their biographies. And it went well beyond the year into beyond. And to do that, we realized that we needed to know more about what these institutions were. And to know that story required speaking with survivors. At the top left, you'll see George. George was raised at the Fernald in the 1950s. He failed an IQ test because he refused to take the whole test. When he quit halfway through, they gave him the number they came up with where he stopped taking the test and said that he belonged in the Fernald school. There's Patricia at the top right. She ended up in the school because of vision problems and an abusive parent. And Donald at the bottom left, who was abandoned to the institution and fought his way out over many years. All of these people still living among us, all of them good friends now. And we realized that we needed to go even wider. This is former Governor Dukakis meeting with our students to tell us about his years overseeing the deinstitutionalization of this vast network of state hospitals and schools that once held people with disabilities, often for their entire lives. And I should say that during the period when this cemetery was open, the Fernald School and the Metropolitan State Hospital really were at their worst. They were at that time dungeons at best. Governor Dukakis very poignantly shared his own personal experiences with that. And I'm going to try just for a moment to share some reflections from a student afterward. This is my student Nadav from our meeting with the governor. I guess I should stop that share and then reshare. Hold on with the audio. But this will give you a sense of how the students experience their time meeting with these people and processed what they learned. Forgive the background noise. This is on a bus back from our trip meeting the governor.
The assignment was to videotape yourself or to videotape a partner, but I don't have anybody sitting next to me. So something that I found extraordinary that Governor Dukakis said would probably have been that he had family, like coincidentally, he had family that had a history involving institutions with disabilities. And I found surprising, or two things that I found surprising actually, was that in the process of his deinstitutionalization, if he were to repeat it, he would start by communicating with the superintendents of the institutions and just speed up the process as a whole. If the process was faster, he said that it would be better. And I just thought that was fascinating. Thank you.
This work with the students is all stuff that had never been told before. The governor had never talked about going into the Monson State Hospital in the 1930s to visit an aunt with epilepsy, a deep connection to the state's institutions. And our question then was how to summarize these stories. Before I go further, I want to share some of them. This is James Farron. He was listed in the registry for the cemetery as James Ferryharry And I think that's very important because that was not his last name, but it indicates how much of people's history was lost when they were placed in institutions. He was probably given this name, and my best guess is that he was unable to communicate his own name clearly. And so someone simply took down what they thought his last name was. Finding the records of an individual when you can't find their actual name takes such painstaking and extensive work. There's Vita Panico. She was an Italian immigrant who had a family here, all of whom were taken away and placed in state institutions, and she herself then was placed in one. And she died at the Metropolitan State Hospital. There's Sebastian D'Agostino and John D'Agostino, whose names were transcribed differently, so we didn't realize until the very end of our work that the two of them were brothers, both of whom ended up in the Fernald School together. For their families to go after them would have been an exceptional risk at the time. If they took two of their children, the chances were that they probably would have taken more. So there was no way to reconnect with your own family. These are the sorts of stories that had to be teased out of this history and discovered in all of this work. And our question then became, if we were going to collect all of these stories, where should they live? This was an enormous undertaking and took much of the year in and of itself as we did the rest of our work. We decided that we needed to do memorialization, a website, signage, and public education. And to pull that off required a large network of supportive people. You mentioned before Senator Barrett has been an invaluable supporter in this work. Councillor Darcy on your board has been an enormous supporter in this work, making things happen. We decided that we would create what's called a Yizkor book. These were used to memorialize Holocaust destroyed communities in Eastern Europe. We decided that we would create something similar for this site. We decided to create a website to house all of the stories, and you can see the process of the students mapping this out. That's Jacob Datesman on the right, headed to MIT next year, who coded the site entirely by hand and created it in a way where other communities can use the code to create their own if they have a similar institution. We created draft signage. That's my colleague Kevin Levin at the bottom left working on signage. He's an expert on Civil War monuments and signage. And we did public education. On the left, my students presenting at Waltham High School to fellow students to do project-based work. And on the right, in the State House, presenting to legislators, one of whom said, I ran by that cemetery all the time. I never had any idea what it was. And so that's what these final products are becoming now. The website has been launched. The flower at the bottom left is the result of Waltham High School students planting flowers at the cemetery that will come up every year. At the bottom right, a draft of the Yizkor book, which will be created and finalized in the coming year, and draft signage, which we will be working on with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to make sure that it tells the story in 3 signs at this site. And I want to note that this map here is courtesy of the late Dave Kays. So the question then is, how do we live with these stories? At the top left, what you'll see is the only monument that any of these institutions on Trapello Road has. It is a monument at the condominiums that were built over the grounds of the Metropolitan State Hospital for the doctors of the hospital. Nothing else memorializes the people who lived in these institutions, despite the fact that their stories are the ones that were taken away from them and need to be told. And it's led me to do a lot of reflecting about how we can do this work of preservation out in the world and why it's important to be doing. I think that there is the need to directly address the injustice that's inherent in places like this. And that need is about the living as much as the dead. Victims suffer across generations, and the perpetrators succeed across generations unless we take action. And to take that action and confront that injustice requires education, collaboration, and people with disabilities. My students are not the AP students at Gann Academy. They have their own challenges. And what I've discovered is that all of who they are is necessary in the varied ways that they learn, or we cannot do this work. It is impossible to do this without the varied ways that everybody comes at this world. And that's a stark difference I think, in characterizing this work from what people would call it normally, which is preservation. I think there's a stigma about how we view preservation in the world today. I think the common view of preservation is that it's something nice to do, that it's an afterthought, it's a luxury if we can add it on. And the result of that is really pity and erasure. We pity people with disabilities rather than seeing folks as equals and working with them, or we erase them. And the consequences of that, I want to say, are very aggressive if you start to push back against them. George at the right was tortured at the Fernald. He has scars on his knees from being tortured at the Fernald. The only way he knew his way back to Waltham to meet me was to meet me at the gates of the Fernald. And when I got to him there, he was being threatened with arrest for trespassing by a police officer. He's considered a trespasser on the one site with which he has a connection in this community. I think we need a different view of what preservation is, which is something that's necessary and comes as the first thought and is seen as work, the hard work that I've just shared with you that must be done and that repairs our world and stops cycles of violence. All of the former residents of the Fernald that we have met with have bravely said that they would like to return. Donald would like to offer tours of the Fernald grounds. Patricia would like to go back to the cemetery and see what's been done with the site. George would like to walk the grounds. They are seen as trespassers on this site. And I think that that is an unconscionable reflection of how disparate our views are about what the memory of these places is and how to begin the work of repair. So many of you know, and I will not go too far astray on this, that many people in the disability community, myself included, are disappointed to see the Fernald site being used instead for a carnival of sorts, a holiday light show by the Lions Club. And part of that hurt is that these three individuals who grew up there are seen as trespassers. My students who have done this work are seen as trespassers. Those of us seeking to repair are seen as trespassers on the open land that is our community's land and needs repair, all while a light show is not seen as trespassing, but erases who these people were. I think that we have substantial work to do in the community. And I guess that's where I'd like to stop, is just to say that you have these enormous gains. We would not have this open land surrounding this cemetery in this community were it not for you. The Land Trust has done that work. We now have our farm saved thanks to you. This is your work. But I'm also struck that we have had our losses this year because of this misperception of what preservation means. And that misperception has cost us the very first victory of this land trust, which was Jericho Hill. And I think that that says that we need a more robust vision, as hard as that is to say to a group of people who already work so hard and do so much. But we have got to find a way to come together around asserting the point that this is a community that needs more of this kind of work, needs more of us coming together around these ideas, or else we're really going to lose the things that are truly irreplaceable. And as many of you have noted, pave over paradise for a parking lot. So I want to share the work that we've done. I want to invite you into conversation with the disability communities that I know, with the students that I know, with the people who I am trying to expand this work into transforming this community to meet what I think it really is. And I guess that comes back to where I started all this, which is this is a great community. We can do great things, and we can certainly reckon with this uneven and difficult past of ours, but not by looking away. And I think that you are the ones who constantly say, don't look away, stop for a moment, preserve who we are and where we are long enough to look and see what actions need to be taken that destroy less and do more to build a better world. In that work, I am more than a happy partner with you and a huge admirer of all that you do. And I know that my students and I will stand with you in whatever you need us to do to try to make this the community we know it needs to be. So it sounds like this evening I have a chance to take some questions. I can take questions after, and I feel like this work always leads to more questions and more questions and more questions. This is my very first attempt at summarizing it, and I'm very grateful to you for listening to whatever that is through Zoom and through this setting, which is its own sort of bizarre nature. And my hope is that at some point we could do more of this in person. But my contact information is here. This is my email address. I'm taking a leave of absence from GAN this year to teach at the Graduate School of Government at Harvard. The cemetery information is here on this slide as well. And with that, I will come to a somewhat bumbling finish just to say thank you all. And I am more than grateful for all the work that you do.
Thanks, Alex. I do have a question, but for anyone who wants to ask Alex a question, please put it in the Q&A and I will get to it. But the first one is, at Metfern, were Jewish people's graves marked by a different symbol?
Well, it's a terrific question. Nadav, the young man that you saw, our stoic young student, called me over at the very beginning of the year. His very first person to study was a gentleman named Sherman Pranka. Sherman is buried, I believe, in grave C9. And he said, I don't understand this. Can we look at the census record? And what he had was the 1930 and 1940 census record for Sherman Pranka. The 1940 said that he was Polish. The 1930 said under his country of origin, I believe, Yiddish. And, you know, we're a Jewish school, and I said, Yiddish, I think we all need to stop for a moment and talk about something. Well, in 2 seconds, the room erupted into, forgive me for this, but dig him up. We got to get him out of there. He's not in a Jewish grave. And I said, whoa, 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 let's get a rabbi first. We have to find a rabbi. So we got a rabbi in the hallway. We got him to come in. And I think that's where that quote from Rambam came, is this idea that what we need to do is leave Sherman exactly where he is. We don't know if he converted. We're still looking through Catholic records. He's buried on the Catholic side, and there's the chance that he did convert. We don't know enough about him to know more than that. There is one other Jewish person buried in the cemetery, John Grasso, whose mother was Jewish. He's on the Catholic side. Our feeling is to leave these people be, but my sense is that Grasso, they probably never knew that he was Jewish. He had an Italian last name. And Pranka, you know, people with whatever disabilities they had may not have been able to communicate who they were. I'll also add that there's a Muslim person buried there from Armenia. And again, he's buried on the Protestant side. We don't know if he ever converted, and it's unclear what is best to be done based on that.
Okay, so somebody else would like you to show the slide with the names again. It's
sure,
massive to see them all in one place.
Sure, I'd be more than happy to do that. Let me, oops, I just did there we go. Let's go back here. Sorry, folks, hang tight. This is the slide with all the names. And let me do that as a full screen sort of thing. Sorry, play from the current slide. There you are. So these are the full 296 names. Many of them were not correct in the registry originally, but were close. Birth dates, hard to pin down. Countries of origin, hard to find. I will say that the most staggering statistic that we've discovered is that an enormous number, more than the general population at the time, were first generation Americans. They were not immigrants themselves, they were the children of immigrants. And it's my belief that these institutions served in part as a backstop to highly restrictive immigration policies in the early part of the century, saying basically, if you make it through the gates into America, we'll take away your kids for looking and acting differently, which has enormous resonance in the current day when we look at what's gone on with ICE at the border.
Another question, there was a Waltham Eagle Scout project at Metfern. Did you work with that group?
There was a Waltham Eagle Scout project. One of the very first things we did was to request all of those records from the mayor's office. Those included a photographic collection of the graves there. So it had a photograph of each stone there and a general layout of the cemetery, and certainly was part of our background research as we began our work.
Where can we buy copies of the ISCOR memorial book?
That's a great question. We need to finish it first. So if you email me, just let me know and I'll put your name on a list. And our hope is this work has been really generously funded by a group called the Ruderman Family Foundation. My hope is that as many copies as we can give away will be available to give out to people.
And this is a question I actually also am interested in, is that you're mentioning 296 graves, but the DCR sign says over 300.
Yeah, very hard to figure out over time. It's been a real challenge. The graves sank. This was never meant to be a cemetery in the first place in the scale that it was. There are many around the country that are 10 times this size at institutions. But basically, as those of you who know the natural landscape around there know, you see ferns come up. It's below the water table. And with the graves sinking for a long time, the exact number was not known. We even struggled to figure it out until the very, very, very end. I don't think it was until 4 or 5 months ago that I felt comfortable saying 296. The other burials are at cemeteries elsewhere in Waltham, at Mount Feak. There is strong and increasing reason to believe that there are unmarked burials across the entirety of the Fernald site that should give everyone pause before people start breaking ground for projects up there.
I think that this one was answered about how many were buried there, sort of unknown. They're all marked by a stone and a number. What was the method of marking?
The method of marking was probably, as someone said to me, simply to tell the living where not to dig another grave. This is not about respect for the dead, to be quite frank. It's about simply not stacking bodies on bodies, though at some point doing some kind of ground penetrating radar there would probably be wise to make sure that just that did not happen.
At this point in time, what would your students like to see happening with the Fernald land?
I think that we've listened a lot. We've met with a lot of people. And to that end, what I'll say to you that should resonate most of all with this group is how many of the former Fernald residents prize nature above all else. They want to see a natural landscape up there. They want to see nature come back, and they do not mean massive recreational fields, hockey rinks. They mean nature. For them, they've said that that is a source of peace, and I think we should give that to them. They've also said a memorial with the names of every single former resident who lived there. I think we owe them that. And we've all collectively come around the idea that the anchor for this site ought to be something like what the Equal Justice Initiative's National Memorial for Peace and Justice is in the South on the former land of a plantation. It's known colloquially as the Lynching Museum. I think that we should be repurposing the central portion of this campus and its buildings as a large educational museum complex to reflect on, honor, teach, and house a reckoning with this history. The Fernald was the very first place. This should be the place where we do this. And my students have worked tirelessly to put forward these ideas, which they really generated our first year by creating a Museum of Disability mock-up at the Charles River Museum, and by publishing a piece in the New York Times, which was met with enormous acclaim and receptivity about centering that at the site.
Right. Thank you. I think we're done. Oh, well.
No, that's
sorry.
okay. We've
One more question.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'll stay after too. So if you have
Right.
more, sure. Yeah.
So we'll just do this one last question. What and where is the documentation of abuse and crimes? I don't think people of Waltham know enough.
Yeah, it's a great question. The most quick resource you can pull up is on 60 Minutes from about 15 years ago, when the story of the radiation scandals at the site were really prominent. And that tells the story of the state boys who were experimented on as part of a federal and private radiation experiment program in the 1940s and 50s. There's an interview on 60 Minutes with one of the survivors. I am currently pulling together oral history interviews with dozens and dozens of former residents and employees. I just finished a book manuscript on the history of Walter Fernald's time running the institution and hope to have that out. In the interim, reach out to me with resources. I do think the community needs to reckon with this more. The Boston Globe, as Bob just pointed out, did something, and so did the Wall Street Journal on the last 14 residents there. That was a really moving piece that shows how much the civil rights movement of the 70s, 80s, and 90s transformed that site into something much better than it had been, and offered a vision for a world without institutions, and shows you the lives of those last 14 residents. As the chat also says, the State Boys Rebellion captures some of that. I would caution that its deep history on the institution is grossly incorrect, but its history of the boys themselves in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s is really spot on, if not one of the most difficult things to read. And the last thing I'll say is that there's a book called Christmas in Purgatory that was banned in the 1960s because it used institutional photos without consent. But those photos exist and are harrowing, and many of them come from the inside of the Fernald School.
We'll get to the other questions hopefully at the end.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
If you could stay for just 2 seconds, Alex, I want to thank you very much. I'm sure all of us would. If we put on the sound, you'd get a lot of clapping.
Well, and you, Diana, have been such an enormous partner in this work. So we went down this road together when the city purchased the Fernald. And
yeah, but I'm feeling like I'm frustrated. You've done more than me. But but when we get to the end, I was going to ask when we get to the Q&A later, could you tell the story you told me one time about Wayne Brasco and the priest and the burial and how residents started to be moved elsewhere?
More than happy to. A cherished photo on my desk, Father Henry Marquardt, and more than happy to share that with you. Sure. Good.
Okay. Well, I think I'll bring up now the next portion, which is our finances, which are not anywhere near as much interest, but important. So thank you.
Thank you.
I apologize, but for some reason, when I do this without being on Zoom, the slides move when I push the arrows, but they don't want to do it when I'm on Zoom. They do something weird. So let me see if I can make it work. Oh, we have a commercial before we get on to the next thing. Just to remind everybody that Giving Tuesday is December 1st, and I know you'll hear from many nonprofits, but I hope you'll keep us in mind. Thank you. Now, for the financial results, Brian McCormick, a member of our board and on our finance committee, will present how we did in fiscal 2020. Let me stop my share. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I want to share. Okay, Brian.
Thanks, Diana, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending our meeting. I am going to discuss the Waltham Land Trust financial results for fiscal year 2020.
Brian, your sound is very distorted. If you could maybe turn it down some, your microphone level.
How's this? Is that better?
No, it isn't. If you try a little lower still. Hello, you want to try again?
Yeah, is that any better?
I'm afraid not. One of the things you can do sometimes is to, if you disconnect and reconnect, you should be able to come right back in with that same link that you had.
I'll give it a try. Thanks.
You could move the...
Oh, wait, right there. All of a sudden now it's better.
Yeah, go ahead.
Try again, talking.
Is this okay?
Yes, thank goodness.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for the patience and the technical correction. I am going to discuss the 2020 financial results for the Waltham Land Trust. And the Land Trust fiscal year end is June 30th. So when I speak about fiscal year 2020, that's the results between July 1st, 2019 and June 30th, 2020. So for 2020, our total revenue was about $82,000. And that's flat compared to $83,000 in 2019. You can see that in terms of sources of income, it was fairly evenly distributed amongst contributions, special events, and membership dues. What's significant, though, is that we were not able to hold our big fundraising event during fiscal year 2020. The Green Space Blues Jam is typically held in May or June, but due to scheduling difficulties from the pandemic, that ended up getting pushed to July of 2020. So the income from that event will show up in our 2021 financial statements. So while our total revenue was flat for the year, our special events income was actually down by about $10,000. So how do we make up for it with the contributions and the membership dues? The contributions were up by 13% in 2020, and our membership dues were up by 31%. And I think almost everyone knows the story by now. When the pandemic hit and everything was shut down, folks headed outdoors. They really explored the green space and the trails, and they gained a real appreciation for the land at this time. And they showed that appreciation to us by, we had a lot of new members sign up for the first time. And we also had a lot of existing members provide additional contributions on top of their membership fees to show their appreciation. And Diana just showed the commercial for Giving Tuesday. You are going to receive a reminder from us in the next week or so, appealing to you to keep us in mind on December 1st. And I think you can see here what a difference that your contributions do make to us as an organization. I also wanted to mention under our revenues, the other line item includes city steward support. On an annual basis, our partnership with the city allows us to get reimbursed by up to $2,500 a year for any fees, any costs that we incur from running the stewardship program. Our total expenses were about $74,000. That's down from $78,000 in fiscal 19. Like Sonia mentioned earlier, we were not able to conduct all the programming that we normally do in the course of a year. So we saved about $4,000 in our typical program costs. So given our total revenue of $81,822 and our total expenses of $74,065, our change in net assets for the year was $7,933 positive. So change in net assets is how a nonprofit organization describes its net income or its net profit for the year. Our net assets are a balance sheet item. That's the description of our assets less any liabilities that results in net assets. The Land Trust has scant liabilities. So our balance sheet is consisting primarily of assets, and those assets are centered around cash and the value of our real estate holding, which is Smith Point. And that's the overview. And if anyone has any questions, I will do my best to answer.
Do we have any?
No,
Okay.
not yet, anyway.
That are the committees are what helps us do what we do. So the development committee, which Barbara, our guru of questions tonight is charge of obtaining grants. Our tech committee is what tries to, what is involved with our website and a number of other activities. And the program committee, which I chair, is what does the walks and the other events that we have, including this meeting. So if you're interested in joining one of our committees, and you don't have to be a board member to join a committee, you can be a member and join, and we'd love to have you. If you're interested, please contact Sonja, and she'll put you in touch with the committee. So thanks. And now on to the next part of our program, the business meeting. So let me introduce Nadine Stein, who will conduct the election of new board members.
Thank you, Diana. We're going to be electing some new board members tonight, and we're also going to be re-electing some returning board members. Before we do that, we do want to recognize a couple of our board members who are retiring. Natalie Hayes, who was on our board for several years, and here she is with her little baby, getting ready for some hikes and hitting the trails with a future steward, absolutely. So thanks to Natalie for all of her work. She did plogging, I think that's what it's called, bicycling and picking up trash, and really, really great in the on the ground. Great advocate for land. Our other board member who is retiring is Maureen Bagfowler. Maureen and her husband Bill, former city councilor, moved to Marlborough, and we're definitely absolutely going to miss Maureen. Maureen worked really hard with us on the special events committee, and tabled quite a bit with her myself. She's here with Sonja and Dave Case in a picture from several years ago. So we wish both of them the best of luck. We know they will not be strangers. And we are really excited about all their contributions, and really have kind of set the bar for the new people that we have coming up. And so here they are: Dan Berlin, Erica Bourne, Tom Gary, Leslie Snedden, and Debbie Von Reckenberg. I think that we're going to, are they going to come on for a second to show themselves, or no? They're not going to come on and show themselves. Okay. However, we are going to have our returning directors, Martha, Brian, and Diana, who you see right now, and you've seen Brian, and you've seen Martha. You've seen all three of them. So they are running for re-election.
Okay.
Here they are. You're just familiar with them. And maybe Martha, can you?
She may be down there.
There she is.
There.
Awesome. Okay. And I believe you are going to tell us how to vote. Then.
Yes, I am.
So we're all going to go off. Shut our video and shut our
we have to vote is what we normally do in a meeting is we have a raising of hands. And so what we're going to do is to use something that the Attorney General has laid and the governor laid out in new rules for people to use during the pandemic. And so that was one of the reasons why we asked you not to use the chat for questions. But what we're going to do is we're going to ask everyone who's a member of the Land Trust to please go into chat. And if you approve the slate of the nominees, so the 5 new nominees and the 3 returning directors, type yes. If you don't approve, you can type no. And if you prefer to abstain, go right ahead. You can put abstain or just not vote. So if we could ask people to do that right now, so that we could have a vote.
Hi, Diana. The votes are pouring in here in the chat. Thank you very much, everyone, for voting.
I think my vote is not being counted.
How did you type into the chat, Mark?
Yes, I did.
Did you
Good.
hit enter?
Then it's being counted.
Oh,
Fake
it's somebody.
news.
Laurel says she saw your vote, so it must be there. You just must have missed it.
Well, I'm still challenging this in court.
Okay, I think we
Thanks, Al.
probably have finished with the votes, from what I can tell.
So there was one just a second ago. But I think that might be it. It seems to have now come to a halt. So I will now save this wonderful document of votes.
Nadine, you're on.
Yes, I do want to say, I'm glad, Mark, we find something for you to do during your retirement. I'm really excited and pleased to share that all of our new board members have been voted in, as well as re-election for the 3 board members who are running for re-election. So thank you all very much for voting. We look forward to having everybody on the board at our next meeting and participating in future things. And of course, people will be asking you about those committees as well. So check those out too. It looks like we're going to have some quick updates on land issues. So at this point, I'm going to be introducing Martha. Well, Martha gave a report already earlier, right? So there's no need to have another report. Is there, Diana?
No, but John Diekman.
John Diekman is going to have a report on the Western Greenway. So John, come on.
Okay, very brief history here. About 2 or 3 years ago, Mark Rudnick obtained a grant from a unanimous donor for whatever purpose we suggested, which after some discussion, we thought that a big improvement in signage and kiosks and possibly other amenities on the Western Greenway Trail would be a useful thing to do with such a grant. So it's taken us a while to really get this off the ground, but about 2 months ago, or maybe it wasn't even quite 2 months ago, we pulled an RFP together to get design assistance and assistance working with the various property owners that the Greenway Trail goes through to basically work out a nice unified design of signage and kiosks, including evaluation of where they ought to be placed, what kind of information they should have in them, etc. And we selected a design firm named Selbert Perkins, and we're very pleased with that selection. And by the way, we received 7 responses to that RFP, so there was a lot of interest in working with us on this project. And there were any one of those proposals would have actually been acceptable to one degree, to at least a pretty good degree. And so Selbert Perkins really stood out among, on top of a very good group of responses. And we've just signed, well, I'm not even 100% sure we've actually signed the contract with them. But if we haven't, that's imminent, and we're about to get the project underway. We're actually going on an exploratory walk of the Greenway with the Selbert Perkins team on Thursday, and we're looking. And the project should take about another probably about the next 9 months or so, finishing sometime early summer, where we'll end up with designs that are fully documented and including the software and the software files, so that they can be sent to an appropriate signage vendor to actually have the signs and kiosk panels, etc., produced. At which point, we've still got a fair amount of money left in the grant to provide for some of the installation, although there's probably going to require a fair amount of volunteer effort to install some of this stuff. Stuff as simple as digging holes to put signposts in and the like. So that's it in a nutshell. Be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any about this.
So that would be great. That's a good segue. Would like to have the current members of the board please unmask yourselves, I guess. Put your cameras on, and Barbara can let us know if there are any questions in the chat, in the Q&A. This is our time to answer questions for people.
Yes, and I have several, a couple still for Alex, but before we do that, I have one for Brian.
Barbara, 1 second. Diana, why don't you stop sharing the screen so that all the people can be seen?
Sorry.
Thanks.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, and there's also somebody from Alex that we shouldn't forget, Bob. So before, let me just ask this one of Brian. What is the real estate holding you mentioned?
Sure, it was Smith Point, which is a piece of land that juts out from juts out into Hardy Pond, and it was acquired. Some other board members could check me here. I believe it was acquired in either late 2005 or early 2006. And for further reading on Smith Point, if you go to our website, we have our old newsletters archived. And if you check out the spring 2006 newsletter, one of our board members, Marie Daly, wrote an article describing what Smith Point is and what our thinking was in terms of why we wanted to acquire it.
Now, do we want to have Bob talk?
Can you get that, make that happen, Dan?
You're muted, Dan.
Thank you very much. Robert, Bob, otherwise known as Bob, I'm going to find you now. I'm going to hit the allow to talk. Bob, give it a whirl.
Okay, am I unmuted and am I audible?
You are audible, Bob. Go for it.
Okay, I would just like to thank everybody for the honor which I've received, and I would like to reference Smith Point because that's one of my favorite places to work, and I want to mention Betty McKenzie because she has provided inspiration and leadership in many of the things that I've done. And I would also like to mention that it was Mark Rudnick who got me involved with the Land Trust in the first place. I believe it was up at MacArthur School. He gave a talk about Hardy Pond and its history. And at that point, because I live in Windsor Village right above the pond, I said, well, if this could happen before all this terrible stuff, it could happen again. And I've got to be part of making sure that doesn't happen. And there's nothing like having a personal stake in the environment and in conservation to really get you motivated. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you so much, Bob.
Thank you. Barbara, you're muted.
Right, I didn't want to disturb.
Okay. It looks like you're talking.
So I do have another question or actually a comment. It seems that Alex, do you want to come in and turn on and unmute?
I'm here.
Aha, there you are. Hi. It seems that the preservation project gives dignity to these people. I'm touched by the attention to understand and get to know the individuals, which suggests the value of individuals. So that was a comment. And
thank you.
I think we already answered that one. So, yeah, we answered the one about the documentation of where the documentation is of the abuse and crimes.
Yeah.
I think we already did that. Okay. So I am not seeing any other questions. Does anyone have any questions?
I saw one from Roger Rubel. Roger, where was that question?
Is it in chat or?
I think you put it in both. No, but I can't find it.
Roger was asking about something in the news recently about one of the burials.
Yeah, he said there was a recent burial, and he wondered if you knew anything about that.
A recent burial where? Sorry, I didn't see the chat. I just want to make sure I give a clear
Sure, no problem.
answer.
So the question is, there is at least one headstone with a name that is more recent. What is the story with regard to that grave or person?
Ah, okay. So their burial doesn't, I believe, go beyond 79 though still. And I think that there's a handful of people buried there. I should go back who have gravestones, and we're not sure why. We can hazard some guesses. I've heard people say that you know, folks with disabilities at these institutions were kind of allowed out to work, sort of farmed out to work, starting during the Great Depression, and sometimes had money in their bank accounts when they died, and I assume could have asked for a gravestone, or their family could have asked for a gravestone if they had money. I'm offhand not sure the ages of every single one of the people who who has a stone, but the general sentiment was that they probably didn't have enough for a burial somewhere else. If you had enough money to be buried somewhere else, you would have been. And I guess that's the big takeaway is these are the least fortunate of a least fortunate group of people. These were the poorest and most sort of lost and abandoned people were buried here. And even the Quarantiellos who I've gotten to know a bit, are uncertain why it is that Celia has a stone, which unfortunately spells their last name wrong, but does not. But no one knew anything more about that when she was alive, so or when she passed. So it's hard question to answer. I'm sorry to say, Roger.
Another comment was that the Wikipedia page for Fernald gives a good synopsis of the history of the site and Fernald's connection to the eugenics movement in the United States during the early 20th century, which is extremely disturbing.
It is disturbing, and Walter Fernald certainly was a member of the National Eugenic Records Office and the organization that housed it. I want to be clear that what makes Massachusetts unique, that's tied to the history of this, is it was never a eugenics institution the way that we think of eugenics in terms of sterilization. Forced sterilizations were not done there. It was seen as something by all of the leaders of the school as something immoral and wrong. It is not to say they didn't do other terrible things, but the balancing force that matters is really the power of the Catholic Church in this state. It was understood in the 19-teens and 20s that to begin forcibly sterilizing people, what you would call active eugenics instead of passive eugenics, which is simply to lock someone away for the rest of their lives, would be met with enormous force from the Catholic Church. And the reason I think that matters later is that the people who began to break down the walls of these institutions after World War II were largely mothers, and they were largely religiously Catholic or Jewish. And I think after the war, when many of them worked, they were not going to go back quietly into just being quiet. And when they had disabled kids, they fought like hell for them. And they had real allies in people like the Kennedys or like Cardinal Cushing and in the church. And those were really the beginnings of opening up institutions, putting the church on the campus that welcomed the community in, and starting to shut these places down. So.
Okay, I have another comment. There was a burial in the 1970s of some preserved remains in the laboratory of the Shriver Center. The priest at Fernald insisted on a funeral and they were buried there. An account by Marie's Daly's next door neighbor who worked at the funeral at the Fernald.
Yeah, they collected bodies at the Fernald in the 19-teens to do research. You know, there is a photo floating around. I've gotten it from folks of a giant Santa in front of a building for this upcoming light show, and the building in the background was used as a laboratory. And there they would take apart bodies and put them in jars and do really unspeakable things. And those two gentlemen, I believe, right, Marie, were they from the Spanish-American War? I believe they were part of a eugenics-based idea, and it was just their heads.
Yeah, it was, so what happened was at the Shriver, there was a new lab director came in and he discovered these 3 heads in formaldehyde in jars, and he did not want them. And so they decided to have a burial service for a funeral and burial service for them. And that again was the priest who was such an advocate for the residents at the Fernald, who insisted on having the funeral for them. I'm not sure that they even knew who the people were. So I'm sure the new lab director was probably just as disconcerted as everyone else in finding them in his lab.
I can't describe how important and central this site is to American history. And in that regard, much of what was done there, including what they believed the heads were for, was what became Harvard's anatomical and neurological sort of museum library, which still exists today. And items were left behind when they moved that from the Fernald campus back to the main Harvard campus and then out to Longwood. And so they found these things. The one other thing I'll say is that out over the wall and as yet undiscovered, somewhere around the cemetery is a burial of limbs. And we know that that exists from the cemetery register, but we don't know where it is. That would have been a common practice back in the day, to bury a limb as sort of a ceremonial process when you did an amputation. And we have basically like walking directions of where it would be, but no way to really tell without further work. And I'm not too keen on disturbing more graves than we need to. So we're gonna have a lot to deal with on the main Fernald campus with that issue for the years to come. So.
And another question, what other uses were concurrent with a cemetery in those woods?
It's wild to look at the aerial photos of that. It was much more cleared before then. So if you go out there, you'll find things in the woods that are old lights and things like that from when it was much more connected to the main campus of the Met State Hospital. It was still isolated enough where kids from the Fernald would escape and go out there at night in the 50s and 60s. To spy on what was being done, but it was a little more farmland and a little more open around that. But as you see on the other side of the road, when you walk out there, it's pretty marshy too. So it is below the water table. And that gets to Diana's, recollection about how this all got closed down, which was that Father Marquardt, Henry Marquardt was the priest there, created something called the Death and Dying Committee in the early 1970s and really spearheaded the civil rights movement that led to a federal judge taking over the campus. And he worked with Wayne Brasco, who is still alive and the head of the Brasco Funeral Home in town, to begin to shut that cemetery down. Wayne started his career by going out there and found that they were using rocks to sink the bodies in the graves because so much water came up. And when he refused to do a burial there, they insisted that he had to, and he replied that he was going to take it to the media. And he met Father Marquardt, who said, "I'll get your back on this." From what I understand, the priest was caught by the local judge, basically for small petty crimes where people had to pay their way for a court fee. A local judge began allocating money, the money they paid off the side to pay for proper burials, to not use the cemetery until they could shut it down. And ultimately what happened is that federal law changed, designating people with disabilities as residents of their communities rather than inmates in their communities. And Waltham's charter says that residents are entitled to a burial in the city cemetery. So Wayne and Father Henry went to the mayor at the time, Arthur Clark, and said their residents now shut the cemetery down and bury everybody at Mount Feek. And that was effective and worked. In 1979, they closed the cemetery down. So by all intents and purposes, everything I've ever heard about Henry Marquardt is that he basically walked on water.
One other comment, although an answer was made for it sent separately, but a booklet called Maybe Where to Walk in Waltham would bring you new needed resources from out of towners. And of course, the answer, one of the answers is going on to the walthamlandtrust.org website, and you'll find all the trail guides for the local area, the Greenway, Prospect Hill Park, and always others. And other things are being worked on, but certainly wouldn't it be nice to have something called Where to Walk in Waltham.
I'd like to say something. One of the respondents to our RFP for the kiosk project, someone who did not get the award, but somebody who was, responding said that he actually, as a student at Northeastern, was an intern at the Gabler unit, and some fond memories of his actually were bringing the children out and walking on the trails around, and that he really enjoyed seeing the children enjoying nature. So there were some happy times. I mean, definitely the thought that folks should be outside breathing in the fresh air, being rejuvenated by nature. That was spot on. That was a good thing.
And one other comment here, any thought about naming something after David Keyes? Maybe something has already been done, but if not, something should be.
Yes, we agree that something should be done. We have definitely been talking about that at the board level, and we would like to approach the city. Naming things is challenging, and there's a process that one has to go through. We feel, or some of us feel, that something at Prospect Hill Park would be appropriate, since Dave really led the fight to remove the Antico Tower that scarred that property for so long. So I think that's kind of where we're thinking. But Dave's fingerprints and footprints are all over Waltham, and I still think of him every day that I'm outside and looking at his trail. So there is something that will happen for Dave.
Okay, and I think that's it. If you look on chat, you will see that the Gun Academy work that the students did is on the website metferncemetery.org. And I'll send that back to you, Diana.
Okay, let me put up our last slide. I'll leave this actually to Nadine to close out. Come on.
Thank you. Before I speak, Sonia, is there anything that you want to say? You haven't said a lot, and you're just so wonderful. I don't know if you want to say anything before we close.
I would just be happy to say again how pleased I am at such a wonderful turnout for our first annual meeting. I think we were up to 84 participants, which is great. That's pretty much the most we've ever had at one of our annual meetings. So that's very exciting. And Alex, they were definitely here to listen to your presentation. So thank you so much for joining us and for bringing respect to those who so desperately deserve it. And anything that we can do to help you moving forward with that project, and the signs, the signage, and anything, promotion, the education, I'm continuing to spread word, and we will be putting up the whole video of this meeting on our website when we figure out how to do that. Alex has given us permission, so people spread the word, and encourage people to look at our wonderful, annual meeting and to see Alex's presentation. And thanks so much to all of you again. And thanks to the directors. I'm excited for our new directors. It's going to be so much fun to have new people involved. And if any of you want to get more involved with our committees, you don't actually even need to be a Land Trust member to be in our committees. We just want interested people who are willing to do work. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. Special events, that committee could use a couple of people as well. So, if there's anything that interests you at all, please email me, call the office, and I look forward to talking with you again.
Great, thanks, Sonia. And I just reiterate what Sonia said. We're really excited to have you in this venue. We hope that next year we can be in person. But if not, we've figured out how to do it this way. So I think we'll be okay. And I just want to close with two lessons that Alex shared that I think are really important for us in this really difficult time that we're having. One is it's really up to us to repair our world, and certainly we do that in the land trust. We actually do repair stuff in the woods, I guess you could say. But it's really important for us to think about the world and work toward repairing it. And the other lesson that that he shared was around stopping the cycle of violence. So as I close, I want to impress upon everybody the importance of being kind to each other and being kind to yourself. I hope that everyone stays safe during this time. And again, we like to see you next year in person. And if not, we'll maybe see you on some of the trails. Good night, everybody.